Hello, and welcome to Counseling Ethics, Lecture 22. My name is Dr. Amber Hughes. In this lecture, I want to talk about distance counseling. In 2014, the newest edition of the ACA Code of Ethics was released, and there was a new section added, Section H, which was Distance Counseling, Technology, and Social Media. This was a huge change to the Code of Ethics because before there were only, I think, one or two substandards related to the use of technology in counseling. So the field has understandably advanced to a point where we have a whole new section related to this aspect of counseling. The section is devoted to ethical issues related to technology. The code requires that the counselor actively attempts to understand the evolving nature of the profession with regard to distance counseling, technology, and social media, and how these resources may be used to better serve their clients. Clients now desire for their healthcare providers to communicate with them via text messaging and email instead of the phone. The issue here is whether these forms of communication are secure for confidentiality purposes. Distance counseling refers specifically to counseling between persons that are not face-to-face in person. Instead, they take place via teleconference, video conference, like Skype or Google Hangouts, telephone calls, synchronous online interaction like chatting or messaging, and email message exchanges. Keep in mind that, and I'm going to talk about this later as well, but even though you don't consider yourself doing distance counseling, there may be times where you do distance counseling with your clients that you see face-to-face for therapy. Okay, I've had students talk about texting their clients, emailing their clients, and what they're doing is therapeutic. So you may be doing distance counseling even though you're not intending to do distance counseling. Okay. Some relevant sections in the Code of Ethics are Section H2A, where clients understand they have a choice and do not have to engage in distance counseling. Counselors allow clients to determine whether they are willing to use social media or technology within the counseling process. And H2B, where the counselor acknowledges the limitations of maintaining confidentiality. Counselors discuss and establish appropriate professional boundaries. This means setting limits on when clients may communicate by email and or texting with their counselor. Again, I've had internship students talk about how, for example, one student gave her cell phone number to her clients, which is appropriate, especially if you're working in private practice. That may be your only form of communication, right? And so her clients were texting her. Again, not unethical. However, her clients texting her at all hours of the day for her clients wanting therapy over text. Again, this is a client that the student was seeing face-to-face. At some point, this counseling student was going to have a discussion about boundaries with that client, okay? So you want to consider that anytime you are kind of opening the door to this method of communication, especially with individuals who really rely on text, and maybe who don't have great boundaries anyway, you want to talk about this in the informed consent process. You want to talk about this constantly. You know, when is it okay to talk to me? What kind of communication is appropriate through text? You need to understand that this is not confidential. It's not a secured form of communication. And so those are conversations that you want to have if you are choosing to communicate with your clients via cell phones or emails. And this may be something that you want to bring up to your organization. Find out what your organization's policies are. Find out what your supervisor's policies are, and maybe establish them if they don't have a policy in place. There is a credentialing for distance counselors. It's the DCC through mbcc.org. This is a credential, not a license. Remember the difference? Now, there are advantages to distance counseling. It increases accessibility for services, especially if you have like an expertise or a specialty area that people may not have access to in, rural areas, for example. This increases their ability to get specialized services and to see experts. Anonymity may also be something that clients like. It may decrease their anxiety. It may be easier for scheduling purposes. It may be easier for, time for people who are limited in their time. They don't have to travel to and from appointments. Maybe they don't have to take off work. They can just talk to you over, a break or lunchtime. And it can lead to better session facilitation through choosing words more carefully, especially if you're using a text-based format instead of spoken words. Now, current research shows a mixed reaction to distance counseling by clients and a mixed result in success. So some like it and some don't. Some achieve success with their issue and some don't. Relevant standards are H4C. Counselors are required to make reasonable efforts to ensure that clients with whom they use technology understand how to use it and the capacity to use it. H4D, when the counselor and client find that distance counseling isn't effective, the counselor considers delivering services face-to-face. And finally, H4F, the counselor warns the client about possible misunderstandings in distance counseling. Some current issues that really don't have a resolution yet include licensure and when you can practice, who you can counsel. So is distance counseling permitted in states in which counselors must be licensed? Which state is used? And so this is relevant if you're counseling people out of state. So if you're licensed in your state, do you need to be licensed in the state that the client lives? Let's say you live in Kentucky and you're licensed in the state of Kentucky, but you have a client who lives in Ohio. Do you need to be licensed by the state of Ohio or not? And some, there are, I think, a few states that have specific, I don't know if they're even laws, but within their licensing, they have restrictions on who can counsel, who is okay for you to counsel in terms of distance counseling. But this is something that's really new, and state licensures boards haven't always addressed these things. Now, the field is changing rapidly with technology. Another issue is how the counselor maintains a full measure of competence in regards to this issue, because of the issues that are ever arising, the type of technology you use, the issues that you face in terms of licensure, credentialing, and so on. There is no reliable method of regulating the services offered right now. There's no reliable method of ensuring competent providers or protecting clients from ill-advised services. Some disadvantages have been named on page 252 of your textbook, if you want to look at that in more detail. And then the final thing I want to mention is insurance. So some insurance companies won't pay for distance counseling. And here, let's take a look at this real quick, is the credentialing through NBCC. Now, again, this is a credential. So just indicates more advanced training. It is nationally recognized, but it's not a licensure. Okay, remember licensure is at the state level. So here they just identify what distance counseling is. Here are the requirements to receive this credential. You do have to have a master's degree, and then you have to get additional training. So here is the content that the training needs to include, and then here's a link to the training approved by NBCC. It's through the Telehealth Certificate Institute. So if this is something you're interested in doing, I would definitely recommend getting this advanced training. All right. Now, even if you opt to not become a distance counselor, you will still likely encounter issues related to technology use in counseling. For example, there's a good chance you will communicate with your clients via phone or text. Standard H3 says that counselors take steps to verify the client's identity at the beginning and throughout the electronic therapeutic process. Again, thinking back to my example of my counseling student who was texting her client. I don't think she verified her client's identity at any point during, she was talking specifically about communication she was having with her client over the course of a day, where her client was threatening suicide throughout the day again. And she was trying to manage this situation via text. And again, there was no confirmation of identity or attempt to verify identity. And you wouldn't think of that though, okay? So she's texting her client about this very serious situation. But again, this is just a very gray area, and so you want to make sure that you're being careful with how you choose to communicate with your clients, because in instances of high risk or high stress, you can kind of forget all of these things, right? You can forget all of these rules whenever you're trying to manage a situation, especially when you're new to counseling. There's also it's very certain, like I said, that you will either be texting or talking to your clients over the phone, and so you want to make sure that you are aware of what's confidential or privileged information through phone calls. On page 255, they talk more about this. Section B3C says that we discuss the private information of clients only in settings in which they can reasonably ensure client privacy. It's hard to do that over the phone, right? And so you want to be careful, again, with conversations you have with clients over the phone. And I can't stress this enough, it's easy to manage your own conversation, right? It's easy to manage your own communication. It's harder to manage your client whenever they are talking, right? And so even if you may just be calling to confirm an appointment, your client may be inclined to discuss information, and it can be hard to set those boundaries up because you want to help your clients, and as a helper you may not be inclined to be more forceful about these things. You just want to be careful about it and be aware of it. B3E says that counselors take precautions to ensure the confidentiality of all information transmitted through the use of any medium. And counselors make every effort to ensure that privacy and confidentiality of clients are maintained by clerical staff, administrative staff, and so on. Email is also a common form of communication. Electronic communication through email says that these messages seem secure because a password must be used to send or receive information. But as we've seen with the latest political dramas, anybody can be hacked. A lot of people have access to our communication that we don't know about, right? Like, so if you're emailing from, your work organization, someone's probably able to see those messages and may even be monitoring them, vice versa on your client's end, right? So it's just something to be aware of. Some advantages are that the service is free, fast, and efficient. It's easy to retrieve messages. You already have documentation there, which is like in the case of my example with the counseling student. The one benefit of communicating via text is that she had everything documented in terms of how she handled the situation and so on. So it's really nice for documentation, especially in emergency situations. And again, you can refer to your textbook for more disadvantages of this form of communication. Other ways you may use technology. are for distance counseling, like we've already talked about. I use the internet for information, especially when I do career counseling all the time. I mean, at least half of many of my sessions are getting on the internet to do research, to look at relevant sites, and so on. And so that's one way you may use the internet. You may ask clients to read materials relevant to their presenting problem. I know whenever I go to the doctor, a lot of times they'll, at the end of my appointment, they'll just print out like a couple of pages of information for more information about whatever issue I'm there for. So I think that's becoming a very common practice. And you also want to make sure that you are cautioning clients about the accuracy of the information, and that you're using sites that are legitimate and generally accepted as sound. So in career counseling, that's a big part of what we do with our internet use, is talk about what sites are appropriate to use for research, what aren't, where can you get good information, and how you should consider this information. Is it something that that's set in stone, or is it something that's ever changing, and so on. You might use it for teaching purposes, as I am using now. Clinical supervision is also becoming, it's becoming more common to provide this over the internet, which many of you are also going to experience once you get to your fieldwork stage. Communication with clients, but also with consultants and colleagues, is going to take place over technology, guaranteed. Record keeping is something that is moving to maybe web-based, or at least computer-based, in terms of keeping records and taking notes. And social media, which I've talked about in a different lecture. That's becoming a common common form of, maybe not communication, but of transmitting information with clients, or sharing information. All right, finally, some diversity considerations. So a major problem in using technology is that it's not equally available or evenly distributed across all people and cultures. Due to this digital divide, not all clients will have access to such services as internet counseling or email communications with your counselors. Something to consider whenever you are maybe not doing distance counseling, but if you're using the internet in counseling, let's say you assign homework, hey, I want you to do this research. Your client may not have access to the internet. Hey, I want you to maybe we're going to do distance counseling next week because the weather is horrible, and nobody wants to travel, right? But we don't want to miss a session. Does your client have access? They may or may not. And they may not want to tell you that, right? So it's important to consider this whenever you're talking to your clients and making plans and making decisions. A legitimate concern is that the poor and underserved will be increasingly left behind as technology advances in our use of it in counseling. Now, technology can help counselors increase their multicultural competence, through our research, through continuing ed credits, through listservs, discussion groups, conversations that you have with people that you wouldn't normally talk to. So technology certainly has its benefits. You just want to consider access concerns, availability concerns if you are using the internet to provide counseling or to aid with your counseling.